It's Paul Joseph Watson with Infowars.com, and we're joined by the always informative Syrian girl, who, as most of you will probably know, is now well known as an outspoken critic of NATO's agenda to destabilise Syria and impose the same kind of reign of terror in that country that we've already witnessed in Libya. Syrian girl, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Paul. I'm glad to be here.
So we've had yet another terrorist car bombing in Syria today, at least 9 dead, hundreds injured, and of course the coverage that I've read so far this afternoon is basically The Guardian again defaulting to the baseless conspiracy theory put out by the Free Syrian Army that Assad staged the bombing. Again, you know, when anybody else talks about false flag terror, they're crazy, but when it's to target somebody who they want to topple regime change, it's perfectly rational. So it seems clear to me, Syrian girl, that Ambassador Susan Rice has followed up on a veiled threat from last week that Syria would be hit with more attacks unless Assad gives up power.
It certainly does. I mean, she didn't hide it very well, and also the same thing could be seen on the U.S. Embassy's messages on their Facebook wall. You know, these attacks would stop if Assad would just stand down. And it's the NATO powers that are set on destabilizing Syria. They're setting up all these explosions. They're using Al-Qaeda as a scapegoat. You know, I'm sure the puppets inside Al-Qaeda, which are inside Syria right now, are setting up some of the explosives and some of the suicide bombings. But because of the magnitude of these bombs, you know, they're quite sophisticated. So in my opinion, it's clear that technological powers that are setting these bombs up, and in order to destabilize Syria, to keep the momentum of this going, to create a civil war, and to show the Syrian government that they're not too far from where NATO can get to them. So it's basically a threat. And what was hit in Deir ez-Zor today, Deir ez-Zor is a town close to the Iraqi border, and a military area was hit, and you know, there was civilian deaths because there were civilians around it. It was actually a military position, and the thing is, the public opinion inside Syria right now, you know, there's people who are in the middle like me. They're not supportive of the NATO intervention, but they're not supportive of the government either. So we call them the patriotic opposition. But the people who are pro the government are actually starting to lose hope, because they say, well, the government is not protecting us, they're not doing their job. And so it does look bad on the government for these explosions to happen. You know, the conspiracy theory that doesn't have any basis in this case, that the government is behind these bombings, is a little bit ridiculous, because the government would love to have all quiet in Syria, for people to stand down, because, you know, and my family included, people are afraid to go to work, people are afraid to leave their house, people are afraid to go shopping. So the whole country is at a standstill, and these bombings just look bad for the government. It collapses Syria's economy, and it only serves the agenda of the enemies of Syria. So that's, you know, you have to ask who benefits.
Well, they've gone basically from calling the presence in Syria of Al-Qaeda a conspiracy theory to openly admitting it. I mean, we had Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta this week said that Al-Qaeda was present in the country, and then also Ban Ki-moon of the UN said that Al-Qaeda was behind the deadliest bombing so far in the tensions last week in Damascus. And we also had this Washington Post article which admits that the US is now coordinating with Gulf Arab countries, arming these NATO-backed terrorists, and that the UN ceasefire is ostensibly a delaying tactic to help these rebels reorganize. So, bearing in mind we know the fact they were airlifted in from Libya after helping to overthrow Gaddafi, can you explain to us why according to Hillary Clinton herself, NATO and the US are on the same side as Al-Qaeda in Syria?
Well, I think the thing to remember is the US, NATO, and Al Qaeda have always been on the same side. They've been on the same side since the inception of Al Qaeda by the CIA in Afghanistan, and it's only been um, uh, this facade of being against Al Qaeda. They um, served Al Qaeda has served the U.S. agenda for the U.S. government's agenda for creating more wars uh, ever since it began. If you look at everything it's ever done, um, you know, except for the supposed attack against the World Trade Centers on 9/11, supposedly that was conducted by Al Qaeda. They've been attacking all these Muslim targets, and in every country they've been in, America has either used them as an excuse to attack or used them as a tool to destabilize and create civil war. So we saw that in Iraq, we saw that in Libya, and we're seeing that again in Syria. And Al Qaeda itself, the structure of it, the people at the top are controlled by the secret intelligence agencies of these NATO countries, Britain and the US in particular. And we saw that recently when they busted one of their own guys. And it's happened a lot, over the last decade. They continuously bust their own supposed Al-Qaeda leader, and he turns out to be an agent of the CIA. So it's not a surprise to see once again that Al-Qaeda is serving the interests of NATO in Syria. It's only surprising to us that they're so out in the open about it now. That's the biggest surprise.
So, quick question. How do you respond to those who charge you with being a witting or unwitting propaganda mouthpiece for the Assad regime?
I think it's just a way to delegitimize my position and my opinion. I've never said anything that meant that I have any connection to the government whatsoever. But it's a way for those that dislike what I'm saying to try to basically wash it away. But I think even if somebody is pro the government, doesn't mean that their opinion doesn't matter. I have friends who are pro the government, and I have friends who are anti the government. But I'm not going to hate either side just because of the way that they feel about our government. Just as you're not going to stab someone if they support the Queen, surely. So it's not, it's absolutely not true in the first place. And the reason they say that I am connected to the government is clear, and that's because they don't like what I'm saying.
Now, speaking of propaganda mouthpieces in one sense, I'm interested, what do you think of our friend Danny Diam, or Syria Danny as he's known, who, at one time was given this almost daily platform by CNN to literally beg for a US or even Israeli military invasion, but has now seemingly disappeared off the radar? Why do you think that is?
Well, he's been a complete traitor from the start, and for many months, patriotic Syrians have been documenting his contradiction and his lies, because he's contradicted himself about how many times he was shot. And then a video surfaced about where he staged an interview with CNN. And for 2 weeks, this video was online, widely available, but nothing happened. And only when InfoWars picked up the story did CNN feel that it was time to act on it. So I think that the fact that he was exposed for what he was is InfoWars' doing.
Well, hey, Syrian state media uses our footage, but it's no worse than CNN and BBC and the likes. I mean, they're openly state media, and they carry the official propaganda line of their host countries. So it's really, when people talk disparagingly about, state media, yeah, it's not going to be 100% accurate, but don't assume for a second that means the likes of CNN or the BBC are, because they're no better than state media, which is why we have a burgeoning alternative media, and that's why CNN's ratings are down at the lowest in 15 years, despite the fact that the whole world's on fire and there's never been more of an interest in news, but their ratings are down at the bottom of the barrel because alternative media is exploding. And I want to broaden out a little bit now and talk about the truth movement in general. Why do you think there's kind of a dearth of women, female activists in the truth movement, and what can we do to encourage more to get involved?
Well, I think socially it's not as acceptable for a woman to be outspoken and opinionated as it is for a man. And that could be the reason why a lot of women shy away from openly talking about politics and war and conspiracy fact or conspiracy theory. So this could be one of the reasons. I don't know what you could do about that because it's a problem for all of society. And I guess maybe it's a cyclic thing. The more women participate, the more acceptable it will become, and perhaps then more women will participate. So
again, just focusing back on the general picture in the Middle East. I mean, as an Arab woman, what's your view of the Arab Spring in general? Are we talking about a completely manufactured movement, or do you have to make different judgments for different particular countries? Many people said the Egyptian Arab Spring was genuine grassroots, whereas in places like Libya and Syria, it's obviously not. But what's your view on it? Do you see it as entirely contrived, or do you have to make a distinction between the countries?
Well, it's difficult to gauge and it's not black and white. So I'm gonna talk about specifics. For the most part, I think it's contrived. I think in the first place, though, there was a drive for revolution in the Middle East. People have had, for a long time, the same people in power, and there has been poverty. So there's a reason for it. There's some gunpowder, but where did the trigger come from, and why now? Why, when the euro is, going down, and there's an economic need for war, unfortunately, because of the world that we live in, the economy seems to thrive on weapons sales and production. So, if you look at the revolutions up until and including Egypt and Syria, they've been the governments that are being installed are more of an Islamic basis. And all of these secular governments are being targeted, like in Libya, Syria, and previously Iraq. So maybe there's a new plan for the Middle East to carve it out differently. I heard there's talk of dividing Libya, just as Sudan was divided. And, a long time ago also we heard Iraq was almost going to be divided into threes: Kurdistan, Sunni center, and Shia south. So perhaps I think that there's someone out there with a plan for how they want to shape the Middle East, and this is a part of that plan, and they're feeding off the desire for change in these countries. And in Libya's case, that desire for change wasn't as present as it was in Egypt. In Egypt, you could say that was more of a grassroots movement because there wasn't an armed insurgency. It was more like a civilian sort of attack, and then the army took over. So some might argue that in Egypt's case, it was a revolution that was hijacked. Some might argue that in the first place, the revolution was instigated because Mubarak was going to die. He's ill, so his death could have caused a power vacuum, and perhaps creating a revolution now while maintaining the same military in power. It's just a way for steam to be blown off, where in fact in Egypt nothing much has changed, only now it's more Islamic. So you have to judge individually. But in Bahrain's case, Bahrain is a revolution that's never talked about in the Western media. Well, not never, but hardly ever. It's totally ignored. But that, I think, has more legitimacy to be grassroots. but Saudi Arabia has occupied Bahrain in order to control that. But you don't hear about that in the media. All you hear about in the Western media is Syria, because it's in the West's agenda to regime change in Syria. So it's hard to um, talk about where does the grassroots begin and the foreign influence, but in each country that's a different case.
So, Syrian Girl, I mean, you've had a massive impact in the alternative media in just the short time that you've been public with your YouTube channel and, of course, your many interviews, including on the Alex Jones Show. What can we expect to see from Syrian Girl in the near future? I've heard whispers that you may be turning your sights on exposing the wider aspects of the New World Order agenda.
Well, I would like to talk about body scanners and biometric identity, the wider. I'd like to talk about this, the structure of secret societies and the world powers. There's a lot to talk about. It's just a matter of time, but the problem is at the moment Syria is what my priority is, because obviously it's my country. So maybe when things calm down, I will be planning on something like that.
Well, it's been great to have you on the show, Syrian Girl, and looks like we're probably going to see you on the InfoWars Nightly News on Monday, which I'll be hosting, so we look forward to that. Again, congratulations on the great work that you've been doing. Your YouTube channel is, of course, wildly popular. We're going to put links to that in this video, as well as to your Twitter and Facebook. So, Syrian Girl, thanks for the time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Paul.